Hi there, Katya. I am so happy to finally have you on the podcast. I follow you on Instagram and you just give such important information. I thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, I'm super excited to share and chat with you and see you face to face. It's already been fun.
Yeah, and you have some ties to the Midwest, so I think that's really cool. We kind of speak the same language when we're saying up north.
Yeah, definitely.
So, can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, I'm a pediatric speech therapist. I'm newer to the field. I graduated in 2020 in the middle of COVID. And yeah, my career has evolved a lot since doing teletherapy in the schools. That's kind of how I started off. But I always knew I wanted to support autistic kids pretty much primarily, but I didn't really feel too confident with it. And I felt a lot of the times like I was spinning my wheels, not really doing the right things. The therapy that I was doing, that I was taught to do, just didn't feel quite right. But I didn't know why until I discovered Gestalt language processing. And I was lucky to discover this pretty early in my career. It wasn't something I was taught in school, unfortunately, but early into my career, I learned it and it really shifted everything in how I support Gestalt language or how I support autistic kids, who are in turn often Gestalt language processors. But yeah, I started as a school-based speech therapist and then quickly started seeing my own private clients. And now I have been the owner of a speech therapy clinic for a little over a year now, and I have quite a few therapists here. But my biggest passion is educating other people about Gestalt language and AAC and just neurodiversity affirming practice. So I do a lot of that on social media as Boho Speechie, and I do quite a few speaking engagements now, which I never thought I would be doing. And I have a few resources and courses on the topic as well.
This is awesome. And I had no idea that you only graduated in 2020. This is
Yeah.
mind blowing because the impact that you've already had on the field and on how people um, treat and think about autistic kids, especially when it comes to Gestalt language processing, is mind blowing. So, thank you and kudos to you for being such a go getter.
Thanks. Yeah, I my style of learning has always been teaching, so I just took to Instagram and didn't have much of a following, and I was just sharing what I learned as a CF and kind of just as I went and learned new topics, I would create infographics about them and share, and then lo
Mhm.
and behold, people were interested in that. So I've always kind of just shared as I went and not really waited to feel like an expert. I'm still not an expert. I'm very much still learning along with you. But yeah, it's always kind of been my style to learn and share as I go, and oftentimes before I really feel ready. But thank you. It's been pretty wild how many people I've been able to connect with. Social media is a pretty cool thing for the most
Mhm.
part.
Yeah, I agree. I just think it's incredible that you came into it, so organically, just wanting to share what you were learning and are impacting so many. So again, thank you. And as we talked about, as you said, Gestalt language processing is your thing. And can you explain what it is and kind of when you started learning about it? Because like most of us, you said, I didn't learn a thing about it in college. And, back when I was in college, we didn't even learn about autism. It was like one lesson in one class. And that's my whole career now, looking back.
Yep, me too. And I really didn't. We had an autism class, but I don't remember learning anything real useful in that class. And still pretty outdated stuff, I would say, or very medical model type stuff. But never once was I told, like, if you want to learn about autism, you should talk with autistic people, listen to the autistic community. Like that should have been the class. That could have been the whole class, and it would have been more valuable because that's where I've really learned everything. But Gestalt language is not a new topic. Most of the research that we have on Gestalt language and natural language acquisition, which we'll talk about, it's kind of the methodology behind it, comes from the 70s and 80s. So it's not new, and it really did gain traction at that time, but then it kind of lost traction. We think maybe, I mean, one, because of lack of social media, but also behavioral methods like ABA started to take precedence and grow really rapidly, and they kind of oppose what we do in GLP, NLA style therapy. So that might have been a part of it, but it really surged again in 2021 when Alexandria Zakos from Meaningful Speech brought the info to social media. And she was really the first person to talk about Gestalt language on social media. And I was lucky to find her like right away. And it was such a light bulb moment for me, as it is for so many therapists and parents, and just kind of went from there. But what is Gestalt language? So there's two ways to process language that we think there are two ways to process language. We still need research on a lot of this stuff, but it is based on decades of longitudinal info and just hundreds and thousands of parents seeing similar trends, and parents and therapists seeing similar trends in their autistic students. But we assume that there are two ways to process language: analytic and gestalt. Analytic is what most of us understand as typical language development. Whether you're a therapist or not, you probably understand language development to some degree. Analytic language processors start with single words. Then, once they have a handful of single words, they combine them to make two-word phrases, three words, and so on until they're speaking in sentences. So these analytic processors right away, they see these single words as building blocks for grammar. Gestalt language processors learn language pretty differently. They don't see single words as building blocks for grammar right away. Instead, they start with these chunks of language or gestalts. And gestalts are often, the word gestalt is often interchanged with script, but essentially these kids pick up on these chunks of language or scripts or pieces of delayed echolalia, which are often songs or movie lines or lines from YouTube or their favorite character, but it can sound a variety of ways, anything from a single word all the way to a whole movie. But essentially, these kids learn language via delayed echolalia of these chunks, these language chunks. And it's not till later that they break down and pull out single words and see single words as building blocks like other kids do right away. And we need more research on exact numbers as well, but we know that many autistic kids are Gestalt language processors. So if you support autistic kids, it's really important to understand what is Gestalt language, how do these kids learn differently, and how can we tailor our methods to fit their unique brains.
I love how you just explained that. That was really, really kind of concise and understandable. Because I think sometimes people hear it, Gestalt language processing, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's too complicated, just the sound of it, you know? And then when you put it into examples, which you do a lot on your social media, so everybody go follow Katja at Boho Speechie, but I think back to students I've had, and I had this little girl a couple years ago in my class, and she was just 3, and she came over and sat by me. We were going to do something together, and she went to sit on the chair, and she fell down. And she said, looked up, and she goes, "We all fall down." And it was like you said, a nursery rhyme. I knew what she meant. It's not that it's meaningless just because it was learned from a chunk or a script or a movie or YouTube. That I knew exactly what she meant. She just didn't have the her language didn't develop in the way where she would maybe say fall and then fall down and then I fell down. She used that whole chunk. We all fall down in her sing-songy voice. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, you did fall down." And her face just kind of lit up like she's going, "You get me. You know what I mean." So I think if you follow Katya, you'll get more examples like that, but those are the things that can kind of hit it home for you if you're listening. Because if I tell that story, everyone's like, "Oh, yeah, my student says XYZ, fill in the blank." Don't you think those examples are helpful for people to kinda understand, Katya?
Oh yeah. If you've supported autistic kids, you've seen them use gestalts, and sometimes it is the meaning is more clear. Like her gestalt fit the context really
Totally.
well, and it was clear what she was expressing. And sometimes it's not so clear. For
Mhm.
example, I have a child who says circus every time he's like overwhelmed and wants to get out of something. And it's because parents took him to the circus and it was like the most overwhelming sensory overload kind of place.
Oh
So
my
that
gosh, yeah.
circus, even though it's a single word, it's not this typical, movie line or song.
Yeah.
That's a gestalt. And that's the beauty of gestalts is they encompass usually this deeper meaning and this, you know, circus for him is really when he says that, he's thinking of this overwhelming place. He's not just
Mhm.
using a word. Same with We All Fall Down. She's thinking of probably what happened in that song or in the video with the characters who are singing
Mhm.
that song. And gestalts are beautiful in that way, is that
Uh,
it they hold so much meaning for these kids, so much more than this word plus word
mhm.
self-generated grammar does. So it can be hard to move past those because they really are so meaningful.
Yeah, and they're top of mind, they're right
Yeah.
there ready to access, and I love how you gave an example of a one word, because sometimes you think Gestalt, you think of, like, the full line from a song or movie or more, but that circus was a perfect example, and as you were explaining it, I'm like, "Okay, my one word would be casino." That would be my
Yeah.
equivalent of circus. Like, "No, thank you."
Oh,
Overwhelmed.
yeah. Casinos are smoky too, which is not fun. Yeah,
Mm,
not my favorite
yeah.
place.
I want to pick your brain about this one. I've seen a lot of kids, and one of my former students, Willie, we're still in touch with his family, and he's a wonderful 31-year-old man now, but he still uses this same gestalt with a lot of people, and I think for him, it's a way to open the conversation. Do you know what I mean? Rather than maybe
Yeah.
expressing how he feels, he says, "What will happen if I cut Peter's hair?" Now, if someone doesn't know the answer to that, they're gonna be so confused, or if they don't know him well enough, they're gonna be like, "I don't know." And he might kinda get distressed if someone doesn't know.
Mhm.
But the answer is, it won't grow back because Peter's a doll. So it was something with high emotion that happened when he was young. He must have had a doll, I can't remember the exact story, went at it with the scissors and was told, "Don't cut his hair, it won't grow back." And for him, it's like this opener for conversation.
Yeah, and that's such a good point about gestalts too, is that they're often very emotionally charged. That's what these gestalt processors are picking up on a lot of the times is these really emotionally charged moments. So if you want to get a new phrase to stick for these kids, like model it with emotion, whether it's like super excited or angry or whatever it may be, adding that will often make it stick. But yeah, that using that as an opener. I mean, we all have things like that. We all have gestalts that we rely on in social
Mhm.
situations, always saying like, "Hey, how are you?" Like that's
I
so
asked
many of
you
us have
how
these.
sorry.
Yeah.
I asked you how the weather was when we got online here.
Exactly. Yeah. If that's like one of your go-to things that you don't even think about, it just kind of comes out, that's a gestalt in itself. But
Mhm. I have never heard anyone say this when you said when you're modeling gestalts or modeling phrases for kids to maybe pick up on to do some with emotion like that. I think that's a really great tip.
Yeah, I was just in a teletherapy session, and mom was sharing that this child uses the same script to say that that something's not working. I forget what it was, but it's something like totally not clear. Like if I had heard him say that, I wouldn't have known that he was trying to say like, oh, it's stuck, it's not working. So she's like, I've been trying to replace it with something that people will understand. And I'm like, okay, let's see how that goes the next time he does it. So he did his gestalt, and then she modeled like, oh, it's stuck. And I was like, okay, he's not imitating that. He doesn't really seem to be connecting with that. What if we model it with real emotion? Because if he's saying that, he is probably frustrated. So next time it happens, be like, oh, it's stuck. And she did that and it worked. He
Oh my
imitated
gosh.
it. And sometimes it really is that simple. But yeah, that is
Gosh.
a big piece for these kids.
Yeah, amazing tip. Amazing tip. Thank you. How did your connection with autistic kids change when you started using approaches to support Gestalt language processors? So like the tip you just gave. Did you find your connection changed with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just if you're doing nothing else but affirming what they're giving you, repeating it back and seeing
Mhm.
it as meaningful. I mean, so many kids go through life just having their echolalia ignored and dismissed as movie talk or whatever it is. So even just doing that often builds so much connection. And then if you're able to join in, like before I'm trying to model new things for kids, I'm really just trying to get into their world, learn their favorite scripts, do
Mm,
it with them, fill in the next line, or just use the gestalts that they use often in my own interactions with them. And when I do that, you can just see the shift. They look at you like, oh, you get me. Like, yeah, okay. Yeah, we're friends. So yeah, it's really beautiful and feels so much better for me and the child, I think, using these
mhm.
methods that are more aligned with the way they process language instead of trying to go against that.
Yeah. I think it comes down to like relationships and this type of approach well, probably all of the neurodiversity affirming types of approaches really put relationship first and allow the child to be who they are. And over the years I've seen lots of different strategies and methodology come and go, and in the schools I feel like a lot of times I was battling against ABA providers, um, not usually the therapists that were working with the kids, but the people that were upper level, about these kind of strategies, relationship based versus just compliance based. And, it's still going on today, but I think these strategies that you're giving, in this podcast can help people kind of overcome that. So, like, just getting down, playing with the child, learning what their gestalts are, jotting them down, um, modeling with that emotion. Um, I think people, especially a lot of my listeners, are in the schools, and a lot of times it's a special education teacher that is kind of following through or with the child most of the day. So, do you have three practical, easy to implement activities that the special ed teachers, paraprofessionals, and SLPs, and even parents can do with their Gestalt language processors to get going?
Yeah, and it's not even really about the activity. Like I have certain toys that my many of my kids gravitate towards, but it's really more about just whatever activity they enjoy because that's going to allow you to model language that's truly meaningful to them. Like if they really like playing with vehicles, then that's going to be the activity that you should do because the language that you model is probably going to stick because those are things that they want to say, like, let's drive.
Mhm.
It's an accident. Oh no, it's broken. Giving them language, Marge Blanc describes gestalts as like a soundtrack to an experience. So giving them that soundtrack that's truly meaningful to them instead of, choosing an activity that fits whatever you have in mind, is going to be a lot more meaningful. So, what activity, often getting moving is good for these
Mm,
kids. So doing things like obstacle courses. I I liked doing simple kind of sensory experiments, like combining baking soda with vinegar, just
mhm.
whatever is going to interest the child truly. So it's not really about the activity.
Yeah.
It's and oftentimes in the schools, push in is a lot more valuable because you're able to model language for them that they are truly needing with peers or in the classroom. So I definitely enjoyed doing that when I was in the schools.
That's awesome. I think sometimes people, whether it's play or behaviors or whatever, I get a lot of questions like, how do I get them to play with a different toy? How do I get them to stop hitting? And it's just so much more nuanced than that. So I'm glad that you said it's not about the activity, especially ones that I introduced. I mean, over the years, you don't know how many times I've been like, okay, I think my student's going to love this new toy or this new activity. And we go to play together with it and they literally walk away. And that is not their issue. That is my issue of I need to pivot and be like, okay, we're going to go back to the thing they love. And so we have to kind of put our pride aside and be like, follow what they like. If their only interest right now is um, making sharks out of Play-Doh, we're going to make sharks out of Play-Doh every time. I'm going to show my paraprofessionals what our normal routine is with it and see if they can kind of match that and learn that way. So, super great advice there. What about
Yeah, and
goals? Oh,
yeah,
keep going.
goals.
I have another idea.
I was just gonna say that, expanding play, like getting them to play with things they don't enjoy is never really my biggest goal. But if you are trying to expand their play, I Alexandria Zakos from Meaningful Speech often talks about, I think she calls it the 3-2-1 method, but essentially you're introducing three toys or activities in the session. And I believe she says two of them are things that the child loves and always picks, and then one is something new.
Mhm.
Or maybe that one is just a new way of playing with it. Like I have so many kids who only want to play with letters because they're hyperlexic.
Yeah.
And instead of just lining up the letters in alphabetical order, maybe the letters are going to go for a swim in this bucket of water. Or,
Mhm.
there's so many different just ways to expand, like very in small changes what they enjoy, and that brings up a whole new world of language around
Mhm.
just the same activity done in a tiny different way. Yeah, but when it comes to goals, I feel like you have to understand the NLA stages, the stages that these kids move through before you can really understand the why behind the goals that we're writing for these kids. So I can summarize that as briefly as possible. Um, but there's four main stages of NLA, and NLA stands for natural language acquisition. This term was coined by Marge Blanc, who's a speech therapist that's done years and years of longitudinal research on Gestalt processors, but she essentially noticed that all of these kids were moving through a similar pattern of language development. So she just named that pattern natural language acquisition. And it has four main stages. The first one being echolalia. So we've been talking with the examples that we've been giving, the kids that we've been talking about would mainly fit a stage one profile. So the kids who are mainly using delayed echolalia or gestalts or scripting to communicate are in stage one. That's kind of the first step in language development for gestalt language processors. And our goal in stage one is to get them more gestalts and a bigger variety of gestalts. So that's essentially what my goals sound like. Maybe it will sound like child will produce 10 new gestalts, and we're just going to keep it as broad as that. Or maybe we're focused on a certain type of gestalt. So we want them to have a variety, meaning lots of different functions of communication. And the main functions of communication that I look for GLPs is suggesting. So, example, a gestalt could be, let's go outside. Commenting, it's so cool. Expressing joy, this is fun. Protesting, I don't like it, go away. So, oftentimes my goals are focused on getting that variety because we want them to have a few gestalts in as many of those functions as we can. So, I might write a goal that says child will produce 3 new protesting gestalts. And I'm really just throughout their day emphasizing those and modeling them and feeding them that in their sound stream. And hopefully they'll pick them up when they are ready and when it's meaningful to them. So that's stage one,
Can I
this
pop
delayed
in?
echolalia stage. Yeah.
Can I pop in about a stage one? Because I think when you gave the example of like, let's go outside, that really, really is a great example of if you model that versus if we say, "Do you wanna go outside?" And our students
Yes.
back, "Do you wanna go outside?" And you go back and forth. "Yes, I wanna go outside. Yes, I wanna go outside." But if you teach, "Let's go outside," that's gonna work in any or you keep model it, and if they pick it up, that's gonna work in any situation and be more grammatically correct.
Right. And if we're talking about how to support stage one, that's the biggest thing. Beyond affirming everything we're hearing, so just
Mhm.
repeating their echolalia back, repeating anything they say, making sure they feel affirmed, is modeling in their words. So yes, like you said, avoiding questioning because these kids use delayed echolalia.
Yeah.
If they fall down and you say, "Are you okay?" Every time they fall down, they're gonna say, "Are you okay?" And literally all of my kids do that.
Yes, mine too.
Um, so instead, if they fall down, you could say, "Ouch, that hurt," or "Give me a Band-Aid," but something in their words. So if they imitate it, it makes sense for them. So we're really just feeding them what they might want to say in any given moment. And that's what most of my therapy looks like is just feeding them what they might want to say and doing it
Yeah.
with a lot of emotion because that's what they pick up on. A lot of these kids are musical, so maybe they need a sing-song intonation. There's lots of little things that we could get into, but that is the
Yeah.
overarching way that we support stage one. We
Perfect.
model in their words, and then the goal is to get them more chunks of language, more of these gestalts. And the idea is once they have that, once they have a big variety and a big repertoire in general of gestalts, they're going to start to move to stage two. And NLA stage two is this mitigating or mixing and matching stage. So the example of let's go outside, that's their original stage one gestalt. It might change to let's go inside. So it's still the same idea and the same chunk of language, but they're changing out maybe a word.
Mm,
That's what stage two sounds like. It's not their own grammar. They're not adding word plus word to create totally their own thoughts, but it's a little more novel and often more on topic than before. And kids can get really good at stage two. Sometimes they can truly, create a mitigated mix and match gestalt to fit whatever's happening. So sometimes it can be a little confusing. Like, is this really the child's own grammar, or are they just really good at this stage two
yeah.
stuff? But
Yeah. I have a question on that one too. So if I had a student who loved the song, Mommy Finger, where are you? And they were using that tune, but then they had like finger puppets. Duck finger, where are you? Is that an example of that second stage?
yeah, and that's funny because that's an example that I use in my course
Really?
a lot because, yeah, oftentimes changing words in a song is the first stage two that our
Mm,
kids do. But yeah, it's still any change to the original gestalt is a stage two. Even if the child was saying a single word like, come on. And now they're able to change the meaning by changing how they say it. Like, come on, that's a
Uh,
stage two. If they're changing the original gestalt at all, it's technically a stage two piece.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be a fun way to enter stage two, is just kind of playing around with changing up some songs,
Yeah.
especially for kids. So many gestalt processors only language is songs. So what do we do with that? One of the first things I do is give them more songs, and often songs that are relevant to what's going on so they can use that to communicate, like put on your shoes, shoes, shoes.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
they'll use that every time they're getting dressed and it'll be, clear communication. But then playing around with changing the words can be a good way to kind of get them to be a little more flexible with the gestalts they're using. And goals in stage two, it's pretty simple. It really just, the overarching goal is that they will use stage two more often. So they'll give you more mixed and matched chunks. The once kids get to 50% stage two, so about half of the things they're saying are stage two, then they typically naturally move to stage three. So often my goal just sounds like child will produce 50% stage two utterances. And then they get to stage three and they mitigate or break down even further and they start to pull out single words. And stage three is kind of the point where they are now starting to operate similarly to how other kids learn language and grammar. They're seeing these single words as referential pieces, as building blocks for grammar. And it's stage three is often a very short blip. It can happen in a matter of days. And then kids move on to grammar truly in stage four, where they start to piece these words together, add in verbs, create very simple sentences. And then from there, more and more and more complex until they're able to say whatever they want. So that's our overall overall goal is to get kids to stage four and beyond so they are able to produce their own grammar. But the length of time it takes to get there and what that road looks like is totally different for every kid, and not every kid, every GLP will get there. But yeah, stage three goals just kind of sound like child will isolate single words and create 2 or 3 word combinations. That's essentially what we're looking for, but it's nouns and descriptive words for the most part. So stage three is kind of like a big game of I Spy. You're just referencing what you see in the environment, like, oh, plants. If I'm looking in my space right now, plant, green, big plant, plant, dirt. It kind of sounds like you're playing I Spy and just referencing.
These are great examples because what you describe as stage three seems like that's where we start in typical speech therapy. Like we're going to name nouns and verb plus nouns. I have visual supports for that. Like there's a place for it, but not at the beginning. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned. I knew this internally and instinctively after working with so many kids, but the questions coming at them, they're not processing that in the same way. And that's not the best place to start. So thank you for
Yes.
describing that. So
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up that point because it's a big one. I see so many GLPs in stage one getting WH question goals, conversational turn taking, and there's a time and place for those, but we can't expect kids to conversational turn take or ask or answer questions or any of those higher level skills that require them to be able to create their own grammar until they're in stage four and beyond. Before then, they might memorize the questions that you're asking and memorize the answer that you want them to give, but it's just a script for them.
yeah.
It's not really teaching them much. I mean, sometimes there's value in teaching some safety questions like, what's your
Mhm.
name? And that can be a script that you're teaching, but until they are self-generating grammar, we really can't. uh, expect these higher level language skills, but they will
Yeah.
hopefully come. But we can't jump the gun. We have to work on first
Yeah.
getting them more gestalts, breaking those down, and then they will get to that place. But yeah, it's easy to skip that if you don't understand how their language processing is so different.
I'm sitting here nodding my head up and down because I think back to 25 years ago. I'm a new speech therapist working in a classroom. I'm running the classroom, communication based classroom with autistic kids. And I had a kindergartner who was doing ABA therapy, and that was my first exposure. And so he had learned lots of different pat answers, but his
Yeah.
understanding of what he was answering and saying was not there. And it was really a good example of this was we had lots of stairs at the school that I worked at, and he fell and kind of slid down the stairs, and it looked like it hurt. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't remember what question I asked, like, how are you? Or are you okay? Or something. And he goes, I'm great. Sorry, that was loud. I'm great. And because that's what he had learned. Whatever question I asked him triggered that response because he had learned it rote. Was he
Yep.
great? No, not at all. Like he had tears in his eyes. So I think that you have to look at that beginning stage, like you explained. And just because the end result might sound like the answer he gave, oh, we have these answers to pat questions, it doesn't mean they're understanding and are going to be able to use them flexibly at all.
Right. Yeah, and we have to understand that a gestalt is not truly a gestalt unless it's naturally acquired, meaning we really can't explicitly teach these things. Even if we think it's a good phrase that the child might want to say and would be helpful for them to say, we can't drill it into them. If
Yeah.
we do, they might pick it up. It's probably gonna get kind of stuck, and they're not gonna break it down and move through the NLA stages with it like we would hope. So we really just have to model openly what we think they might wanna say in the moment, and I like to think of a model more as an offering than anything
Mhm.
else, because a model the word model kind of has that, like, the definition of it is something that you're giving with expectation of imitation, but, an offering is they can take it or leave it, and that's really what we're doing. If it's truly meaningful for the child in that moment, they might repeat it or add it to their bank of stored gestalts, and if they don't, we'll try again later. We'll try it a different way. We'll try another gestalt that might fit them better. But yeah, I see so many Gestalt processors who are stuck on these really rote phrases that are, well-intentioned. Whoever
Yeah.
whoever taught them, it served a purpose, but it often doesn't go as far as we would hope, and it's the purpose is pretty limited, oftentimes just rote requesting, for example, but it can be hard for these kids to move past that kind of prompt dependence or just seeing language as transactional instead of something that's truly fun and self-generated, and intrinsically motivated. And that's what we want for any kid.
That's perfect. Perfect way to wrap this up. I have to tell you that I know people listening are going to be like, how can we learn more specifically about Gestalt language processing from Katya? So, what do you have to offer for people who want to learn more? And we can put all of this in the show notes so they can find you.
Yeah. So you can find me Boho Speechie on Instagram and Facebook, and then bohospeechie.net has all of my GLP focused resources. I also have things on Teachers Pay Teachers, but I'm moving all the GLP focused things slowly to my website. So I have a parent handbook in Spanish and English that just describes 10 easy to implement steps that you can do right away at home to support your child. But that handbook's also great for a therapist who doesn't quite know where to start with the GLP and just wants some basics. I also have a teacher version of that. So if your child is starting with a new teacher and you want them to understand what is Gestalt language and some easy supports for the classroom, you can provide that to them. Teachers can also look over that themselves. Yeah, and then I'm working on some shorter courses. Right now, I have a grammar for GLPs course that's just 2.5 hours. I try to make these really accessible, not only financially, but also time wise. I know oftentimes when I purchase a course and it's 12 plus hours, I'm like, I am actually never going to get through this. And I just give up because I don't have the time. So I like to try to make it tangible. And easy to take in an afternoon. So I'm working on more 2 to 3 hour courses. I'll have one soon of intro to the earlier stages of GLP because the one I have now is stage 3 and beyond. And then um yeah, we'll see from there. I'm always taking feedback, but
Awesome.
that's where most of my stuff is on my website.
Well, I'm going to send people your way for sure. And you told me like a little, I don't know if this is a secret or not, but you
Oh,
have
no,
a
we can
podcast
share.
coming out?
Yes, that is true. I am co-hosting a podcast, Great Language Partner, GLP, the Great Language Partner podcast with my friend Nicole, who is Connection Speech Pathology on Instagram. She's awesome. She has even better examples of like early GLPs because she's all about helping parents identify and support it. So she gives lots of really great examples and reels of what early Gestalt processors sound like. But we're doing that together, so that podcast will be she and I will do a lot of episodes that are just Gestalt language focused, really diving into your questions and some niche topics. And then we have people coming on where we're just talking about autism in general. So we'll be talking to occupational therapists and feeding specialists and a mom who has really great advice about potty training autistic kids and all the things. So because we know supporting language is so much more than just supporting language. We really have to, the supporting autistic kids is so multi-layered. So
Mhm.
peeling back those layers for parents and therapists. But yeah, thank you. I forgot about the
Yeah.
podcast, but
Well,
it is
good.
coming
And
out soon.
that's so exciting because if you attended the Preschool Autism Summit, you got to hear both Katja and Nicole, and they're both amazing. And those two combined together, I cannot wait. So get it on your playlist when it comes out. And thank you so much, Katja, for being here today. I really
Yeah,
appreciate your time.
it was fun. Thanks for having me.